Welcome, everybody. Glad to see you. Everybody coming on in. Glad you're here. We're going to ask everybody to make sure you're muted.
Call from wireless caller.
Ah, somebody calling in as well. All right.
Call from wireless caller.
Okay, admitting all. Looks like the waiting room has moved. Mike, I'm disabling the waiting room. Okay, there we go. All right, everybody's coming in. Welcome. Welcome. So glad you're here. We just ask if you would mute yourselves, and even if you're on the telephone, if you could hit the mute button for right now, that would be an awesome thing. We'd appreciate that. And we will give you opportunity later to participate. And those of you, I think so many of us now are familiar with Zoom. At the top of your screen, you can click speaker view, or you can click gallery. And there's some control that you have of all that to see who's talking. So take a look at that and get yourself situated with the view that you like the most. And I'm Colleen Dara, and I'm the Internal Communications Coordinator for the denomination. So welcome. Glad that we can be here and share in a resource together. Rebecca.
Good evening. I'm Rebecca Wilson, and for those of you that I haven't met, I joined MCC staff in April. I'm a proud member of the community development team, serving as your church support and development coordinator. So thank you for coming out tonight. And I'd say let's just take a moment to center ourselves, take a breath, and I'll offer a prayer, and then we will get on with our meeting. So, gracious God, we thank you for this day, for the opportunity to gather this evening. We are grateful for everyone here and for everyone who will watch this recording at another time. We are grateful for technology that unites us and for your spirit that binds us together. Bless this time of conversation and learning. Strengthen us for continuing the good work of MCC throughout the world. Help us be faithful stewards of all you trust to our care. Tonight, especially, we are mindful of communities impacted by fires and hurricanes and violence and the ongoing effects of COVID-19. Protect, shelter, empower, comfort, and heal all who need you this night and in those to come. In your many names and with our many voices we pray. Amen.
Amen.
So at this time, we have two special guest panelists with us tonight. And so I'm going to invite them to introduce themselves, to tell you who they are, what their roles have been and are with MCC, and to just tell us quickly what wisdom and expertise you bring to this conversation. So Reverend Annetta, we'll start with you.
Okay, wisdom. Well, great. Well, good afternoon, good evening, however it is. I'm a Reverend Annetta Brooks, and I'm a member of Founders Metropolitan Community Church here in Los Angeles, where that's my first church that I attended when I joined MCC in 98, 97. Currently, I am serving as a volunteer clergy at Founders, and some of my past experience. Well, as a layperson, I did serve on my board of directors for 2 years until I became a clergy person. What experience I bring is I have served as an elected governing board member from 2010 to 2016, primarily in the governance committee. And I've had a 10-month governance appointment for the 2018-2019 years. I served as the clerk for all three General Conference business meetings, that being 2013, 16, and 19. And I had the privilege to be one of the instructors for the MCC Polity class for a few years. So I've had some governance and bylaw experience, and the good news is I showed up. It's Wednesday, life is good. So it's an honor to be a part of this conversation.
And we're glad that you're here.
Me? Okay. Yes. I'm Diane Fisher. Roles I've held, the most important role I've ever held is being Carly's mom. And that's the best thing in the world. And now following that within MCC, the other things I've done, I've been a local church pastor in 3 congregations. I've been a district coordinator of initially one district, then they added an additional district on. And so I was doing both of them until we merged them just before they became regions. Then I became a regional elder. And then I went back to pastoring when I left that job. And I am currently the pastor of MCC Rehoboth in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. And the other important thing to know about me is I'm Canadian, because everybody must know that. Anyways, it's good to be here and good to see you all.
Thank you for being here. So before
Rebecca, that's just, I was going to say, that's part of our extra diversity is that you've got 2 Canadians on the panel, even though we're living and working in the US, but you know,
right.
how blessed are you? And despite the fact that I'm partly hosting this with you, Rebecca, then I'm also a congregational pastor and have conducted congregational meetings via Zoom. So I come in that role this evening as well.
Well, we're excited about all that we're going to share tonight. But before we go into the questions, I just want to call your attention to 2 documents that went out in the Staying Connected this week. One is an advisory from the governance committee that was put together. Regrettably, Reverend Paul Whiting was not able to be here tonight. He sends his greetings. He worked hard to get that governance committee advisory ready and sent out. Also, along with that, there was a document that went out with some ideas and things to consider when planning your meeting. There's just some questions and some ideas on there. So if you didn't get those documents, we will make sure that we point you to the links for those after this meeting. And now Colleen has our first question.
Okay. So yeah, and we will put those links again in the Connect next Monday as well. So what options are there for churches to hold congregational meetings during COVID? Some churches are back in, some churches are back in with like maybe 25%. Some churches are not meeting in person at all. So what are the options for us to conduct congregational meetings? Who wants to go first? Diane this time?
Yeah, I'll go first. Well, I think that there's a number of things. There's the hybrid model where you have some people who are at high risk and not coming to churches where they are allowing people into their churches. You can do it with both Zoom and with people in the room. You can, if you want to make it really equal, you could have the people in the room at the church using Zoom as well. And then everybody would have the same access to the same kind of voting things. Zoom is probably one of the more user-friendly tools to use for congregational meetings. And it allows you to both share documents, share a screen and let people see the agenda or the documents, and to do polls, which are like places where people can vote for things. So Zoom has those capabilities. There are other programs that you can use. Some people use WebEx. And so part of it is seeing what your community uses and that they're familiar with, and then finding ways to adapt that for your congregational meeting. I guess the one thing that you've got to be aware of is, does your state allow virtual congregational meetings? Not all states do.
And so if I can add on to that, in addition, keep in mind that for UFMCC, we are a California-based corporation, 501c, and therefore primarily churches that are in the United States primarily are governed by that primary article or corporate document that we have. And I won't ramble off the codes because I think Reverend Paul has covered that. But what's important with that sets the tone. I realize in our bylaws, it also does state that persons outside of the United States must follow the guidance of their nation or location to incorporate that. But I want to acknowledge from an initial perspective, your governing document is the fact that you can have hold virtual meetings per the state of California. There also in this COVID, the fact that we do have a document that was prepared for this COVID pandemic, the charity governance during the COVID-19 pandemic, was developed in May of 2020 by the California Department of Justice. It is a guidance document that speaks of electronic virtual kinds of meetings that can be held. But at the same time, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, released an executive order that put the state of California in a certain stay at home and certain kind of guidance. I mentioned that because you still have to go by your state, may have special lockdowns and openings because COVID varies in each state. So you want to consider what that is, because here, even in Los Angeles, we can have up to 10 persons in a room. So we do a live cast. That may not be the case in Florida or whatever state you are. So just want to add that 2 cents.
So one of the questions our congregation came up with too early on, and maybe some smaller churches have done this too, is about people's technical familiarity. So one of the things we examined as an option in our church was whether or not we might use even one of the conference free calls and do a conference call for discussion and use SurveyMonkey for voting. It's not the route we chose, but I just want to lift that up as another option. We didn't choose it because it didn't give us any opportunity for discussion. Once it was time to vote, it's like they happened separately and our folks were able to use Zoom, but that might be something that would be another option in another setting.
We also, with people on the phone, we had people, a text ready to go to them.
Good point.
That had the voting things that people were doing on Zoom, and we could send it via text to them at the same time, so they would get the same, everything was happening at the same time. They didn't feel left out.
Yeah. And that's important too, because the size of your congregation may matter. And I know from a denominational perspective, we've used SurveyMonkey, and there are other tools that can be used to create what's important, the virtual space. And that's depending on what you're trying to achieve in your congregational meeting. What are you trying to achieve in your congregational meeting? There's a lot of flexibility.
Yes, and that's one of the things that's in the documents that are now linked in the chat box of the Zoom meeting. Is one of the things to consider in your planning is what is on your agenda, what votes need to be taken, if any, and so that your platform or how you design your meeting might be impacted with what items are on your business agenda. Reverend Diane, you mentioned in a previous answer a hybrid model of having your meeting, and that would be different ways that people could participate. So maybe what might be the advantages and or disadvantages of doing a hybrid model as opposed to just one way of having the meeting?
Well, the advantage, I think, is that all people participate in the way they feel comfortable participating. A disadvantage is the cost of setting up the kind of monitors you need to have to make that happen. Although if we're just starting out and you're a congregation that's not huge, you can do it with computers. But for a hybrid model, you really need to have a couple of monitors so that you can see the people and they can see you. So it goes back and forth. And so if you can do that, the hybrid model works well. And it's something to consider as we head back to worship. And we head back at some point. There's been things have changed in our lives, and we're aware that people have gotten comfortable attending online, and there might still be it would still be good to have it as an option that people attend via Zoom. We have people that have not been able to attend church because they're bedridden or they're in a nursing home, and now they can. And that's one of the gifts of it. So, yeah.
At MCC Knoxville, we were looking again at that hybrid model of having a few people that might come to the church, no more than the 10, and they'd have to wear their mask and be socially distanced. And we set up the projector so that everybody on Zoom was on the projector, and set up the sound so that they could see and hear for the discussion. But it became more of an issue about how will they vote? How do we hand out paper ballots? Who's going to handle them and count them then? So then that required there being somebody else at the church to handle those ballots. And as it turned out, there was no one that wanted to come to the church facility, but we did set up in order to do that. But it was actually the literal issue of protecting the anonymity of one or two that might come to the building. Protecting their anonymity in voting was more complicated than
Well, if we could do it on a cell phone, if they had their cell phones, and at the same time as we're putting up a poll for Zoom,
could text.
we send a mass text. You know, we get the people, we know who they are, we can just send the text. And that allows them to continue, although we'll see numbers, phone numbers when they come back in. So we'd have to have somebody to count those still.
Colleen, I think maybe we'll go on to the next question, which is
Okay.
on you.
So yes, so Annetta, this is one that comes up all the time. What's the difference between virtual voting and absentee voting, which I think is prohibited in our bylaws?
Correct. Let me just do absentee voting. Both absentee voting and proxy voting is prohibited for UFMCC, but absentee voting is kind of stagnant. It really is the fact that a physical experience is taking place and people are choosing not to come to the meeting. Therefore, you want to send your ballot, you want to vote in absence. And so we don't allow proxy, which is again, someone representing you cast your vote. You have to be present to do that. So that's the physical absentee vote. I will not be at the meeting, here is my vote. In virtual voting, what we've done is created a space for this virtual reality. There is an attention at the same time in a virtual space simulated by the computer software, Zoom or whatever it is, that we're making these decisions, which sometimes can change at the same time using the various mechanisms that you described on the poll and other things. But we're all here virtually together.
Okay, thanks.
So this is to all of the panelists. What's important to include in your promotion and communication for your virtual meeting?
You have to be clear about what it is you're doing. So if you're looking in particular about the voting, they need to know ahead of time. They need to know how we're going to do it. If you have an opportunity to do a practice run, like Sunday after worship or something, you can do that. I think that the other thing is, it's the same thing as getting people to any annual meeting, which is not generally, well, not always an easy thing to do. You know, people don't like meetings. So having something that will appeal to them. We have done virtual things like a virtual breakfast and meeting. We've said, come and you'll get pizza. The only thing is you'll have to provide it. We did showing a film that we had put together for the church, a new advertisement thing to get people come and see the movie about the church. So we have tried to be as creative as possible to get people to come.
Right.
I think you have to really promote your congregational meeting and be clear about the system you're using, the platform you're using, have a forum, I think, to help discuss the issues where we're not really worrying about Robert's rules, but a forum where people are not like, am I clicking the wrong button or am I doing it at the right time? But just a chance for them to talk about the issues and be heard. That helps. And while you're at the forum, practice how you'll do voting and communicate that that's what you're going to do at the forum. So practice how you will do raising your hand and making a motion, seconding a motion, and how you will do the voting, and be clear about the time that you will be having the meeting. Yeah.
Right. So it is that notice, if I could just piggyback, remembering that making sure your membership, be it communicated by mail or by email that the meeting is coming, of course, in your regular bulletin announcements, what it is. I think normally the purpose, the date, the time, and I think at a minimum, most places want 2 weeks notice. But again, I love the fact that you point out, if need be, there's a form or some kind of pre-meeting so people can practice so that the virtual meeting can go officially as quickly and as swiftly as possible.
I noticed that Candace was saying that her folk like Facebook. And so again, this is a hybrid. If you're going to use Facebook, you can do some group things with Facebook as well. You can get people on calls and things. You can do Facebook Live, and people can type their questions in. You then can use Messenger or some other way of voting. Or you can do a mass text again for voting, or you can do SurveyMonkey if people are comfortable with using SurveyMonkey. So you can use Facebook and Facebook Live. It's just a different experience of how people put their hands up. Instead of putting a hand up, they just type in their questions. And if you can, how do you get the whole board? If you have your whole board, or if you have your treasurer, how do you get them to be live at the same time? If they can come into a physical space and be 6 feet apart, it would be fine. So there's just little things. But yeah, you can use Facebook Live as well if you want.
You have to figure out how you're going to do your votes. Yeah, you have to figure out your voting system.
Yeah.
And along with that, Adam, maybe that comes up later. Along with that, there is some factors of privacy or security. And we need to consider those, and we can talk about what that looks like. I know that there are obviously with Zoom passwords and all those kinds of things we use, but the question on the other systems, how do you do that? And always depends on what things do you want to secure? Is it the people, or is it just the fact that these things are happening? But I know there's another part of the conversation. We'll cover some of that.
And you can set up a room in Facebook as well, where just people who are members can be in that room, and that nobody else is in there. And you can even close the room after the meeting, get rid of it.
And that's through Facebook Messenger, though. Is that correct?
Having a room?
Yes, a Facebook room.
It's just Facebook offers the opportunity to have a room, much like we do with MCC clergy.
Be like a group. So you'd be setting up like a closed group.
Right.
That requires someone to request access, and then some person designates, to grant access to that.
And I see Candace saying they're going to do board elections. They're thinking of using SurveyMonkey, and we did board elections, and we did use Zoom for voting. And I'm going to demonstrate that here in just a few moments. But I did want to share a bylaw. I'll make sure I get the right document to share my screen with you all. It would be funny if I shared you something I should not have shared. Wouldn't that? Okay, now this is from Many Journeys MCC in San Mateo, California. Terry Eckelberg's the pastor there. And this is one of the things they did with their congregational meeting, that they had their annual meeting, and this was promoted in advance. And then this is one of the early agenda items, and they actually revised their bylaws to make sure that everyone was clear and that everything was in alignment. So basically they added a sentence to the end of the Article 5A about time and place. And they added the sentence, "These meetings may be held in physical or virtual space." So that was one of their first items of the agenda of their annual meeting. So I just wanted to share that with you. It may give an idea to some congregations about just kind of cleaning up our bylaws and making sure that we're explicit that virtual meetings are okay. Much of what we're talking about too varies by the size of church that you are and how you might do it. I had some conversation with Robert Griffin from Sunshine Cathedral MCC in Fort Lauderdale. And for example, a church of their size, so much of the annual meeting the work has been done behind the scenes, been done between staff and board, and key lay volunteers have already taken care of much of the business, so that when it comes before the congregation, it's much more a vote of affirmation. It's not like a long engaged congregational meeting that some of our churches are used to having. Can I have a witness to some of those? I know we remember some of those really long meetings. So pretty much people know what's going on already, and there's a different maybe level of trust with the board and leaders and staff, but it's pretty much all done. And the congregational meeting, maybe 10, 15 minutes. And I know that happens in some of our churches as well. So as we're talking about how to conduct a congregational meeting in the time of COVID, it's going to matter by your size, the way you've done business in the past, so your congregational expectation, and the amount of business you have to do at the meeting. And that might help determine the platform you choose to use, or the way in which you would choose to do voting. Does it need to be anonymous voting, or is it a show of hands? Is the congregation small enough that you could see everybody? Could the moderator see everybody on one screen? Or do you need to hold the hands up while they go from screen to screen to see what the hands are? Those kinds of factors can affect which platform you use and how you want to conduct that. I hope that makes sense.
So another question for all of you is thinking specifically about the meeting. If your meeting is virtual and let's say it's on Zoom and you record it, do you also still need to take minutes, or can the recording replace the minutes? Can the chat box be your minutes? What advice would you offer about that?
Go ahead, Diane.
We would take minutes because we have to have a physical minutes in place for people. They just like physical printed out things. So we would do that. Also, a lot of the things that we would do on Zoom, people might not want us to post the annual congregational business meeting. It's one thing to post worship and another thing to post people asking questions that sometimes are problematic.
And in addition to that, the answer is yes, no matter what. For a legal document, you do need to create out of your recording the electronic version of minutes, because there are still certain items, your motions, the quorum, those things that need to be recorded, because your minutes still are a legal document of your corporation. And so you need to have that electronically. And actually in the back of the governing board policy handbook, there's an addendum 1 and 2 that will list the types of articles or the retention period for certain articles that you have that are requested. And you may use that as some guidance. You know, you may say, how long do I keep it? 7 years or whatever. So I'm just pointing you to that document and that addendum to give you some. But the bottom line, you still need to create minutes with the basic actions and the results of that out of the video.
And your clerk may be glad to have a recording, because it might allow them to go back and check things, and they didn't have to just be trying to hear it and write it down right away, but they could actually go back and double check, is that what I heard, or who was it that seconded that motion? They'll be able to have a way of checking that. If you're wanting to get the list of the people that were in attendance, you can get that from your participants list. You can maybe use a tool like Snagit to take a snapshot of the participants lists and get the attendance that way. You can also have people check in the chat bar, so you get a record of their attendance that everybody has to sign in, and that gives you that record. Another thing is for the congregational meeting is have people register for the meeting. So they have to register, and then they get the link, and that lets you also see if it's all members that registered, or did you have some non-members that wanted to come? Because most of our churches allow non-members to observe meetings, or friends to have maybe voice but not a vote. So you'll see the status of all those people that are coming and would know in advance who has a link, and is it all members that I'm dealing with, or do I have like 2 friends of the church that have attended? And that will help you look for not only setting your quorum, but also knowing that balance of votes that I would expect. Because if suddenly you have non-members also in your meeting and you're getting more votes coming in than you have members, then you know somebody's voting that ought not to be.
So this makes me think, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Let me just recommend also that the link, the roll call, the participants, since you're using Zoom, is before the meeting. There have been occasions that people start to register people doing their worship service, and that it carries on. I mean, you're trying to get people, so you want to have your quorum so that you can start. However, in this instance with the meeting, just as you described, Colleen and others, is that the accuracy of your count for your quorum, so you can get the results appropriately, especially when you're having elections that are secret ballot, that being lay delegates, board of directors, and of course, if somebody's electing a pastor, those are the things that require a very succinct count. You would want to make sure you have those list of members and that you can cross-reference that for an accurate vote, particularly if something is challenged. Of course, we never do that. Go ahead, Rebecca, I'm sorry.
Oh, I was just also going to mention quorum, and I see someone asked in the chat box about what happens if a church doesn't have quorum on the actual day of the meeting. Like maybe people just don't show, or maybe people are having technical difficulties. Does anything about quorum change in a virtual setting?
20% is per at a minimum. That doesn't change. It has to be. If you don't have your quorum, you can't have a legal meeting.
Yeah, well, that's the same. Well, let's look at some things on Zoom. And I know we've got some people on here that are experts and some people that haven't seen it before. So let's just have a little fun. There are two places that you can see some different tools that you can use for your meeting. One is if you click on the participants button, then you will see some other things come up at the bottom of it. You should see a choice of yes, no, go slower, go faster, and more. Are you finding those? So if you found them, would you please click yes, I found it. Let me see a bunch of yeses popping up. I got Diane's. And I see the results of those. I'm seeing them come in. I see the results of those show up for me in my participants list. Not everybody has said yes. So are you having some hard time finding it? You click on the participants list, it'll open it up, and then you'll see yes, no, go slower, go faster, more. At a webinar that I was at about conducting congregational meetings, it said that we could assign a role to go faster and go slower, but sometimes that is also used by people to say speak slower, or okay, we got you, move on. So that might be useful in board meetings. So, shh. Okay, got some laughter from that. If you click on the more button, then you've got thumbs up and thumbs down. So it's a little more polite just to vote yes, no. Those yes, no's don't give you an abstain. If you really want to use abstain, maybe you use go slower for the abstain. Again, you can assign that. But you can use thumbs up, thumbs down. You can also use applause when you're giving appreciation at the end of a meeting, or motions of appreciation. You can use the applause. The coffee break one, you may not want to be using in your meeting, or the taking a break sign. You may not use that in your congregational meeting, but you can assign a role to those. So if you're doing a motion of something that simply needs a yes, no, a basic majority, you can use the yes and no. Makes sense to everybody? Mm-hmm. All right, I said somebody gave me an applause. I think that was Rebecca. Okay, and then there is polling. Now, I'm not positive on this because I've been working with a paid version of Zoom for quite a while with my other ministry, Mobilizing Love, but I'm not sure if in the free version, if there's polls. Does somebody know that?
I think so.
You think so? Okay. Well, polls will appear at the bottom of your screen, usually about the center between participants and chat. And you won't be seeing it right now because you're participating in our webinar. So just the people that are hosts would see it. So we have polls, and in polls, we can create a question that will appear for you. So I am going to give you a sample question here. Okay. So here is a simple question for you. We're going to elect one of these. So maybe you have one vacancy on your board, and I'm asking you this question. You're on an island, you may have one animal with you, and see how you people are, you're voting already. In a congregational meeting, I should have said, do not vote until I say vote. That's what would happen in a congregational meeting. I did not say that. It's my fault. So I'd say, I'll put it up. I will read the question, and then please vote. So everyone vote. And then I give time for the vote. There's actually a clock on it. You can allow it to be open for a length of time. If you were doing a hybrid model like Diane was talking about and had someone who was texting in their answer, this would allow time for them to text it in, that you could be having this time of voting. Does that make sense? And so I'm going to come to an end of the polling. Everyone has voted, I'm now going to end the voting. I have ended, and I'm going to share the results. Can you see that now?
Mhm.
Yeah, you can see that. Okay, so the dogs won and the birds and cats were left together. All right, so pretty simple to do, and the results are instantaneous. That is the beauty of that with polling. And I'm not sure, yes, we did get a second one. This one is multiple choice, and I'm going to ask you to choose 3 only. Please don't vote yet. Please don't vote. You can, just like at general conference when you're voting, the maximum that you're voting in this case will be 3. You can vote for 0, 1, 2, or 3 of these choices. Please prayerfully consider your 3 favorite food groups, and you'll notice we had some fun with what I consider to be a food group. Coffee, chocolate, pasta, steak, or vegetables. Would you please vote? Up to 3 as a maximum. Would you please vote? Oh, you can't vote because I haven't launched it. There we go. Please vote. And again, people that would be texting in could be doing that right now. And if I knew that, I would allow enough time to make sure that I receive the text and keep this open. And you'd need to know if you had 5 people that were texting, or 2 people, or 10 people, you'd need to know that and add it into the results. All right, I'm going to end our voting now. All votes have been cast. I'm ending the voting, and I'm going to share the results. And coffee and chocolate tied. I know who my peeps are, so I'm going to pass that information on to the general conference planning team as well. That the 2 most important food groups to have on the island of a general conference are coffee and chocolate. Okay.
Colleen, we had 2 polling questions in the chat box.
Yes.
One was a question, I'll ask them both. One was someone wanted to know if the moderator can see the vote results. And the other is, how do you ensure that only people that are eligible to vote are able to vote?
Yeah, and then there's actually a third one too on accessibility. So can the moderator see? The moderator sees the votes coming in. The moderator does not see who voted. They just start flooding in and the numbers start going across a line, but I can't see who individually voted, and that doesn't trace. Okay, so it's totally anonymous. And the second one was
how do you ensure that only people that are eligible to vote?
That's exactly why I was asking the question, or making the suggestion about the registration, so you know who's in your room. Are they all members or not? When you have an open link that you've sent out, you don't even know if somebody is joined into the meeting that has never even been to your church before. Though why would they? But we don't know that. The registration lets you know who's in the room and how many members are in the room, how many friends, how many non-members, and we have to then ask people to be respectful. We went through this in Knoxville with our clerk, and we had determined, because I can see the total number of ballots cast, that if we had more than that, then we would know somebody was voting that shouldn't be voting. So we had a system, sort of a checks of balances on that. Diane, looked like you had something to say.
I said, for the most part, people aren't going to vote if they can't vote.
Right.
Because what do they gain? And even if they did vote, generally there's not that many people that drop in on the very popular annual Congregational business meeting and want to stay and vote. And if they do, it's not going to skew your results that much. There's not that many.
And Catherine asked if this was accessible for someone who is blind. And I have to admit that I have not tried this with someone who is blind, to ask them if their reader reads the poll or not. But another option might be to set them up with their cell phone to text in, if you wanted to do that, and you could read the numbers with each item. So if cat was 1 and dog was 2 and bird was 3 and horse was 4. That would be another way that we could make sure of the accessibility. And it's an excellent question. Thank you. When you have 2 rooms going at once, can you have 2 rooms going on at once in Zoom members in one room and friends in another? You could, but then they can't hear what's going on. So if you needed to separate for voting, I think you would have to move the non-members to a room and keep the members in the main room, because polling will not work over in breakout rooms.
Right.
So I think it's about trust, and it's about our communities. This is a time when we have to do some things different and may have to enter into some trust with each other. I hope that's helpful.
And hopefully someday it'll be a larger conversation about why do we have membership?
Okay. True enough. So Diane, just while it's related, how does the governing board conduct their votes?
Oh, well, we trust each other. We show our hands when we're voting, or we say aye, and we try to reach consensus, and we generally do. So it's pretty easy on the governing board. We don't have a lot of contentious issues on the governing board right now. So we just vote.
Okay, thanks. And I see one question here, Rebecca, I'm going to ask it before we move on to about what about couples? How do they vote? Do they have to have 2 devices? Again, I'll go back to my experience with Knoxville, and we had to talk to all the couples that usually watch Zoom worship together on one device. And we were able to determine that the household had at least 1 smartphone, probably 2. And so they watched the congregational meeting on the computer, but when it came voting, 1 voted on the computer and the other was signed in on their cell phone and voted on the cell phone. They have to have separate devices. Everybody has to have a separate device to be able to vote this way.
And
again, you might use the texting if you needed to. Sorry.
I don't know. There was also just one more question asking if you could restate who sees the total number of votes cast in a poll. Is it just the host, or does everybody see that?
Did you all see it when I put it up? When I shared the results? Did you see it?
I did.
Okay. Yeah. So just the host sees it. And then I click a button that says share results, and immediately it shares it to you and it shows the totals.
If you have co-hosts, they also see it.
Okay.
So anybody with a host after their name, any kind of host, will see it.
So
and if you're on a cell phone, you might not see it, or an iPad.
So small, yeah.
Yeah. So sometimes the final results don't show up for you when you're doing that, but we can tell you who's won.
We should have read them. Yeah, it would be better to read it. It would be more better accessibility. Good point.
And so again, just to clarify, someone is wanting to say, and I'll be honest, I don't remember, did we just see percentages, or did we see the total number of votes cast when you shared the poll?
When I shared it back, it showed the percentage.
Okay. So does Zoom have an option for showing total votes?
To show that to you, I don't think it shows it.
It showed it to me. When you're the host, it'll show it as people are voting.
Okay.
And you'll see the numbers as they're voting. But it goes away pretty quickly. So
okay,
it's harder to, in a situation like that, know how many people have voted.
Right. And there's another question before I go on to the one on paper about just how determining if a member is in good standing so they can vote. That process would be similar to what it would be for an in-person meeting. I would assume that, the board or the clerk, somebody would do that work in advance to make sure.
That should be done in advance, because there's an annual scrubbing of the records of members before a congregational meeting, including especially people if they've been inactive. Normally the clerk notifies them, and if they want to reinstate themselves based on some criteria, they can. That has been some ways of doing it, but you don't do it at the meeting.
Okay. And I see a few more questions about polls. And so we have some time saved at the end for more questions. So I'm going to ask one more that we have on our list, and then we'll go to the ones in the chat box. But this is for our panelists. How do you suggest churches handle motions or nominations from the floor in a virtual meeting format?
I'm going to address that, but let me just address one thing I said previously. There are people who join the church on the same day, and if they've added to membership, they do get to, on that same day, yes, they get to vote if you have a congregational meeting that same day. I just want to open that opportunity for. But getting to your question about nominations and motions, if a congregational meeting, traditionally our bylaws will say that nominations from the floor are not, be it virtual or hybrid, are not allowed, if you will, during the annual congregational meeting. Primarily what's voted on or nominated, you should have had or a list of board members, back up. You're running for board members, you're trying to fill lay delegates. The exception, of course, sometimes people, if they have a vote for a pastor, those are things that require a secret ballot. So technically, most people don't have nominations from the floor. I just need to. Now, if there are some other kinds of issues that people have or processes, that's a different process. Meaning, if you want to talk about your hospitality committee, and that's a different kind of a concept that's not a secret, in my opinion, a secret ballot. That requires nominations per se. It's an informal kind of a conversation, just like informal votes that come for thank yous and recognitions.
And you can put your hand up if you've got a question. There's that option. And it would be just like you were doing it wherever you were, or if you're doing on Facebook Live, the person could type their question in. So I think that it's not going to be that different than it would be in your regular meetings.
I noticed that Wes typed in about that their board decided not to do the annual review of the members this year. And that might be something for people to think about and have a motion about that, given that it's hard to attend this year and maybe people were struggling about technology or whatnot. So it might not be the time. You may postpone that or something. And that was one of the first questions asked tonight too, was would it not be possible to postpone a meeting? That is a possibility. And you have to, again, look at your bylaws and see what the laws, state. Can you gather? I know that in a past setting with MCC of Greater Dallas, we did that a couple of times when we couldn't find people that wanted to run for the board or whatnot. And we were trying to deal with some things that we had a congregational meeting that lasted about 3 minutes, that we called the meeting to order, and the only matter of business was to postpone the meeting or to table the meeting until such and such a date. And we voted to move the meeting, close the meeting. And that was the only business we did. So it might be that you could have a 3-minute long congregational meeting. And if you feel hopeful that we'll be together soon, I'm not that hopeful that we'll be together that soon, other than being together virtually and spiritually.
Yeah. And if I can add on, is that with any process, if the congregation is not able to elect board members or whatever, don't forget that the board of directors can appoint persons to serve until such time as you're able to hold those kind of elections. But other items that you talk about, and I realize that you were talking about the way you nominate, it's true, very simple to raise hands, and you have the buttons that allow you yes, no, and whatever affirmation. That's a different thing. But I think sometimes people get concerned about their officers and lay delegates and those important things. You also, just bottom line, have an appointment mechanism in your bylaws and with your board of directors that you can do. And I also need to say this because someone had asked me, what if we're not able to approve our bylaws, which is really a hands up and down versus a poll. We are not able to approve our bylaws at our congregational meeting. For some reason, Zoom crashes and you can't do that. I need, in reference to adding the virtual paragraph in there, or words that say you can hold virtual meetings, you can't. Just know that you're already covered until such time as you can. And I just say that the ability to have a virtual meeting is a part of the bylaws. How you want to do it in your local bylaws, how you want to do it in your local bylaws to address it, that's a different matter. If you have it explicitly in your bylaws, it says nothing else will matter, or we can only hold physical meetings. There is in the California charity governance, the ability to have virtual meetings.
And those of you who have your own 501c3, go and make sure you check your state. We
That's
were
correct.
fine in Delaware.
Yeah, that's correct. You check your state. There are some additional things. I agree. Thank you for bringing that up, Diane.
So we have been trying to follow all of the questions in the chat box as we go. It's possible that if it gets scrolling, we missed something. So if you have a question that you'd like to type in the chat box, we'll do our best to give you an answer.
Or if someone has already had a congregational meeting and you've had a different experience than what we've been describing, maybe you would unmute and tell us what system you used or how you solved the problem.
This is Wes. Colleen, I'm interested to get your feedback on this, so I want to offer this option just to say, what do you think? We were trying to avoid having to register everyone and just say come, because we want to get as good a turnout for our meeting as we possibly can. And so because of that, when we're going to use the Zoom participation list to figure out if we reach quorum, but then for the votes, because we may likely have lots of people in there who are not members, we're using a Google form, and we're asking them to put their name on their ballot. So it's the Google form has first and last name, and then whatever the questions are on the ballot. And Google will show us the results for the answer as a separate little chart that it will make automatically. So we'll see the answer that way, but we will verify that the proper people voted by comparing the list of names with the list of people who were registered for quorum. So I don't know if that's, running a little too close on not having secret ballots, but it was our only way that we could really think of how to manage a large group of people trying to vote and making sure the ballot was protected. So.
Yeah, I think you've got a couple of things that you're weighing there. So you're weighing more inclusion, more people come to the meeting and participate, making it easier to access, but then you have to have some other way of controlling the vote, if you will. It does mean that some people might decide not to vote if they don't have that anonymity of a vote. But then again, so you're trading off accessibility and inclusion. You have to see, I think it's going to be related to the culture that you're creating in your own congregation. And you folks have used Google Forms before for some things. So that's something that they're also familiar with. So it actually might be easier in your context, but whereas it might seem too exposed in another context if they haven't led up to it. That would be my thought.
We have a question in the chat box, or it's just a reminder for anyone that doesn't know. It's an important one. If whoever is hosting the meeting does not have a paid account, a free Zoom account does not allow you to have meetings that last over 40 minutes. So that's something that you'll want to think about in your planning. Is there somebody, does your church or does your pastor or does somebody in the church have a paid account? Otherwise, if you have more than 2 people, after 40 minutes, you'll be timed out. So think about that as you plan.
And as you do that, my sense would be that there are many of us that do have paid accounts, that if you needed to use a paid account and your meeting wasn't on the same day as my meeting, I would be happy to let people use my paid account. It's not like... So
an economy of sharing.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
And I know that some of us have been using Zoom for worship. Others have been doing other methods, or you've been recording or whatnot. If you're not Zoom comfortable, I'm going to say, then you could set up a time to work with some of us if you wanted to. I'm doing one with a church later this evening. So we're just going to kind of go through it, their board and myself. So if you wanted to, practice a little. There's a lot of people around the denomination. You don't have to even call a denominational staff person. There's lots of colleagues on here that would be happy to help you have a practice run.
And I see that Nathan has raised his hand. So if you want to unmute yourself, we would love to hear from you.
Yeah, thanks. This is another question that's sort of weighing what one is valuing in the meeting. But I can think of 1 or 2 persons who are in my congregation in Portland who are longstanding members, who will be very invested in participating, yet they continue to have technological challenges. For example, don't have devices that access Zoom, and one of whom does not even have a cell phone that texts. So I'm wondering, this is helpful information, but if you had to make a decision about that, could one, I'm thinking in those cases, they do have internet access, could one send a Google form to them? But anyhow, I'm just wrestling aloud with just a few individuals that even still with these options will find it difficult to access, who are very attached to being able to vote. So yeah, vote
So
in particular.
We did have the same thing, Nathan, that we've got some people that don't. So what we've done is we've found cell phones or iPads or things that we took over to people so they could use those. And we just walk them through how to use it. And if they can use it for the rest if they want. But I've got a plethora of electronic devices.
Mm-hmm.
And our house is very electronical. And I can share that stuff. And that's what we've chosen to do, is we chose to get things to people. And there's a couple that still, I don't want to do it. I'm not going to do it. And in that case, we just said, well, we're sorry. This is the best we can do right now.
So that's exactly the situation that I was facing here with two people that don't have smartphones. They have old-fashioned flip phones, and they didn't have computers. They have no internet at their house or whatever. So while the church is closed, I do the live service from the church every week. So I do go to the facility and do it there. And the decision was for that congregational meeting was to open the church to them to come in with distancing from me and with masks. And we had ballots available for them that we'd set out like the day before that would be in a spot. So I wasn't literally handing them to them at that time. And then neither one of them ended up showing up, truthfully, but we did accommodate that.
The one person in particular I'm thinking of would not even be able to travel to the site because it's a considerable distance and they have quite vulnerable health. So there are multiple sort of barriers for this particular individual.
Right.
So I am thinking that the suggestion of, can I figure out a pairing just for this occasion, if possible? Yeah.
And a pairing could even happen via phone. Somebody else asked about old-fashioned conference calling, and yes, you could do that. We talked about before, and maybe then use a text response or something. But if you had just one or two persons, maybe they have a phone buddy that they're talking to who has two devices, and they've signed in as two devices. And the clerk of the board knows that you're going to see two devices with the same name come in, and I am being myself for this, and I'm representing person XY for this one. And so they could relay, their vote, and you could still participate. Because this is the challenge for us, is about inclusion and accessibility and still conducting our business in these days.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Other questions? I see some people got into the whole question about Facebook or doing a virtual service on Facebook. And there's still questions, isn't there, about doing worship? Someone said maybe we needed to have another webinar, a webinar part 2 on virtual worship and how's it going, and the benefits and deficits of Zoom Live to Facebook, the combinations everyone's using, and the live streaming. I see Wes nodding his head. I see some others saying yes, yes. So kind of maybe a part 2 on that. All right. Yeah. I'm hearing you.
Yeah.
Okay. Other questions that you may have?
Yeah, Colleen, there were a couple questions you gave me in advance for some folks. I wanted to summarize kind of quickly. It was realized that there was a question of filming and policy. Do you need permission to record your virtual meeting. And of course, the preference, of course, is to record it so you can go back. And one of the suggestions is, and I looked up in a some law library, that the recommendation is, again, to provide a banner, and maybe there's an announcement at the beginning of the meeting, kind of a, not necessarily a disclaimer, announcement that it is recorded, some of the things for people to be aware of. And again, because people can show their face, their name, whatever, or not, again, for those people who are uncomfortable, they have a choice. But again, the recommendation on filming is, again, to just have a banner to disclose. You do not need an individual permission slip like sometimes in worship, or pictures. If you're taking pictures in your worship service, you get. And what will happen to the recording, I think we talked about, is it Google preserving that recorded in some Google form, or whatever those proper terms are for the repository, until such time as you can create your minutes for the next congregational meeting to approve. Because the reality is, once it's approved, then you of course can not necessarily destroy that video, but you at least need something to have to back up the documents and the minutes that were approved. And last but not least, again, if you're concerned about people on Zoom, be aware of your legally peeking in and out. I'm told there's some spies that do come in. You can all be aware of the password that, again, keeps that safety with your audience. I think that was it. Go ahead.
Okay. I think Charlie had asked, maybe we got it, Charlie Garrison, about if someone was using the phone for call in, and how could they do also text. So I think it depends on what kind of device they're on. You know, if it's a smartphone, then yeah, you can have multiple apps and you can go over to your texting even while you're still on your conference call. If it's an old flip phone, no, they're not going to be able to do that. So this is one of the challenges for us, for boards and pastors, is to know our congregation and know our congregations in terms of their technology, accessibility, availability, comfort.
If they only have a cell phone and they don't understand about how to text, you can even text on the flip phones, but if they don't understand about that, you can ask them ahead of time, is there anybody you feel comfortable relaying your vote to? And then get them to have a call with them.
Our prep used to be focused on finding board members to run and getting our budgets to balance and all of these things. Our prep now is what technology and what platform and how will we do the anonymous voting. It is more work. Be gentle with the pastors and be gentle with the clerks of the board. This is new territory for a lot of people in conducting congregational meetings this way. So I'm gonna, Rebecca may have some more things to say. I'm just gonna do my wrap up of saying, over communicate when, how, where, and have practice times with your board, practice times with the congregation, so you know how you will conduct your voting, and do some fun things. And trust me, people have fun if they're picking the animals or favorite foods or whatever. Make up some very silly polls and try them. We did them in the forum. We had several polls that we did in our forum day. And then at the beginning of the official congregational meeting, still, we did some silly practice polls that day before we did the official poll, just to make sure everything was working and people were fun. And fine with it. And you will recall at General Conference when we had those of you who were there, when we had electronic things, we had to do some practice voting too, just to make sure our technology is working. So over communicate and practice are my two keywords for you today.
And my closing thoughts are just, this is new ground for all of us. And so be gracious with yourself, be gracious with each other. And as you're thinking about, your planning, I mean, it's a business meeting, but we are churches. And so how do we keep people at the focus of what we do, and being inclusive and hospitable and making sure that we're as accessible as we can be to as many people as possible. And I'll also just say that Colleen and I, but all of MCC staff are here to support you. If you have questions, you can email us. Anything that we can do to help you with planning or implementing your meeting, we're here for that. And we are so grateful for Reverend Diane and Reverend Annetta for being here tonight, for sharing your wisdom and expertise, and for all of you that have sat through this and have shared your questions and participated.
And thanks, Marina, for putting the documents in the chat for us. We appreciate that.
And to Mike, of course.
Yes, and Mike getting us on here and getting us all situated. All right, well then, thank you.
Teamwork.
God bless, and good luck with your congregational meetings.
Have a good evening.